Though many races remain too close to call, it does appear that the Republicans will control the House of Representatives next year, allowing the anticipated Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, and GOP leadership to pump the brakes on the Biden administration's legislative agenda. But the red wave that many expected did not occur. Why? What were the surprises? Well, joining me now is the man who has all the answers, Scott Rasmussen. He's the president of RMG Research and the editor-at-large of Ballotpedia. Scott, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Tony, it's always great to be with you. I don't know that I have all the answers, but I do have to correct you on one thing. This election is not over. Very likely we'll be seeing a runoff in Georgia again. And it could very well be a runoff that will determine control of the U.S. Senate. But you are right. Most of the races are called.
You know, and to the issue in Georgia, I mean, this is deja vu. We had this just 2 years ago, and we're seeing it again, controlling the outcome of the United States Senate. I feel sorry for those folks in Georgia, especially those who watch TV.
No, I do, too. They're just going to be swamped with ads. I think there's something, though, you have to recognize about this. There's two big differences between this runoff and the runoff from 2 years ago. 2 years ago, the runoff took place in January. This year, it's going to be December 6th, a lot closer to the original election, which means there's a lot less time for the parties to gin up their get out the vote efforts. Secondly, Joe Biden is now president, not Donald Trump. And what that means is the Republicans have a bit of an edge this time going into the runoff. Don't quite know what's going to happen, but if it's a choice between helping Joe Biden's agenda and hurting Joe Biden's agenda, that may outweigh the choice between Walker versus Warnock.
Okay, Scott, let's step back. And, you know, everybody was kind of predicting a red wave. It was anticipated. Some of the polling was showing that. It does look like the House will be in Republican hands, but the margin's much narrower than anticipated just a week ago. So what were the surprises here?
The first surprise, youth turnout very much stronger than we would have expected. And overall, the turnout was just a couple of points more favorable to the Democrats than we might have expected. When you talk about House races, how many seats the party picks up, a 1 or a 2 point difference in turnout can be the difference between, say, a 10 or 12 seat pickup and a 40 seat pickup. A lot of close races. Almost all of the toss-ups went to the Democrats.
Now, you talk about youth turnout. Does the student debt loan forgiveness have any factor in that?
Absolutely. It's one of the issues that would have been considered, and it was considered to help drive up the youth vote.
So generally speaking, that segment, that demographic doesn't vote very heavily. What do we know in terms of percentage turnout among that? Do we know that yet?
We don't really have good numbers on it yet. We just know from the exit polling and other sources it was higher than expected, but we don't really know. And let's be clear, youth turnout still wasn't very good. It's just a little bit higher than expected. But again, 1 or 2 point difference makes a lot of difference.
In a nation that is so divided, you're absolutely right. Just a few handfuls of votes can make a difference. Now, help me with something, Scott. When I look at some of the exit polling and the dissatisfaction with President Biden, his policies, the economy, and the depth of that discontent. I mean, some people, 1/3, saying they were angry about the situation in America. So why did the majority of voters stick with the president and his party?
First, it's not clear that a majority of voters did. I think a slight majority of voters actually voted for a Republican.
Yeah.
But not nearly at the levels we would have expected. There is a disconnect that is going on in American politics between the president and legislative races. We noticed it in 2020. Joe Biden won the White House, but Republicans gained in the House. This time, with Biden and his job approval rating in the low 40s, we would have expected a bigger wave. My sense is partisanship still very alive. You've got, hardcore Republicans, hardcore Democrats butt heads. They each have some supporters, and most Americans are trying to keep their head down and avoid getting caught in the crossfire. But that partisan dynamic is now a little bit separate from the Biden-Trump dynamic. And I think I would put it in the sense that when people think about the presidents, or especially those two presidents, they're thinking a little bit of yesterday's news. And really, when they're voting for the House and Senate, they're trying to think about what's going to happen next.
Yeah, thanks for correcting me on that point about the majority. It wasn't. It was not what we had anticipated.
Right.
But when you when you look at, I would say, the last decade and a half, 2 decades. I mean, you can go back to George W. Bush and his race with Al Gore. I mean, we're down to counting hanging chads. I mean,
Right.
We're a divided nation. And I think there are some that think, well, if we just win this election, there's going to be this cushion here. I mean, we have 2 very different worldviews, if you will, that are competing against one another, and the policies could not be more different from those 2 worldviews.
We have had 9 consecutive presidential elections where nobody's won more than 53% of the vote. Never happened before in American history. Yes, we are very, very closely divided, and we desperately need a landslide because, when Ronald Reagan won 49 states, Democrats didn't say if Walter Mondale had done something different, he would have won. We really need that to clean our system. How do you get there? There are competing worldviews, but I would put it in this sense. America was founded on the ideals of freedom, equality, and self-governance. For almost all of my life, and perhaps much longer, the political right has been identified with freedom. The political left has been identified with equality. And those perceptions still, everybody wants both, but you place a priority on one side or the other. What is happening right now is the Democratic Party is beginning to move away. The progressive wing of the Democratic Party is moving away from equality. They're talking about equity. And that's a concept that the vast majority of Americans reject. So at some point, a leader is going to figure out how to lead a movement of freedom and equality. They are going to force the progressives out into what Ron DeSantis said, this is where woke goes to die. Those policies will never carry the day. But who will do it? I don't know. Both parties have strengths and weaknesses in trying to do that, but that's going to happen. I'm still very optimistic about America. I believe our best days are still to come, and I believe it because we've been through this before. I mean, I remember the late 60s and early 70s. We never thought we would be where we are today, but shortly after that, Ronald Reagan came and brought us morning in America. So we'll go through that again. It may get worse before it gets better, but our best days are still to come.
When you look back to Ronald Reagan, and there was a lot of Democrats that left the Democratic Party because the party had been shifting, and they came and they supported Ronald Reagan. That was what gave him the edge. And I've observed this in my almost 20 years here in Washington, that the Congress really does reflect what we see happening in the states. The red states are getting redder, the blue states are getting bluer, but Congress, either you have the Democrats are becoming more liberal and the Republicans becoming more conservative. There appears to be less middle ground.
Yeah, and that is a function of the election process. It is a function of gerrymandering. When you have 90% of the congressional seats really drawn to select one party or another, it's hard to get the kind of balance that would be much healthier for our system. If you go back to the early days of our country, and all the way through most of the 19th century, the average turnover in an election in the House was 50%. One year it even got to 76%. That kind of turnover, it keeps away entrenched attitudes. We don't have that system anymore. People go to Washington, they get into Congress, and they stay. They get put into safe districts, and then they promote their agenda, knowing that they're safe from any kind of consequences. And that happens to people in the very red districts and the very blue districts.
Scott, final question for you as you look at some of these races, and we made reference to this earlier, but so many races are so narrowly divided that just a handful of votes will make the difference. And that really speaks to the importance of everyone participating in the process.
Right. We're in a situation right now where turnout determines the results. We can talk all we want about campaign strategies. Campaigns are about fundamentals. The fundamentals this time were the country's not in a great spot, but the Democrats had a good Senate map that set up automatically a number of close races. And in those close races, every single ballot counts. I do think we have to acknowledge a couple of other things that have happened, though. In this election, it became very clear that Florida and Texas are no longer swing states. The second and third largest states in the nation are Republican states, and the states that have become the battlegrounds, Michigan and Pennsylvania. By the way, Republicans had a horrible day in both those states on election day, but those are states where they are competitive now, and they never were before 2016.
Yeah.
So progress is being made.
Scott Rasmussen, always great to talk with you. I'm sure we'll be talking with you again over the next month as this election cycle continues.
All right, look forward to it.